Let's make a patchwork table runner, perfect for the holidays. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are going to be making a quilt using strips of material. So I have two different colors and I'm going to be alternating these back and forth in a strip to make a patchwork effect quilt. So now the best part about these is that you just need a 2.5-inch wide strip. You can make it however long as you'd like. So if you really don't even want to cut anything out, you could get one of those jelly roll packs and do it that way. First step was you want to lay out all your fabric. So I'm going to be using 10 strips and I've alternated the two different colors, and we are now going to be matching these up into pairs. So specifically with right sides together, just matching 2 at a time, and then we're just going to be taking a long seam along that edge. So I just went through, used my quilting clips and pinned up all of these so that they would be in matching pairs so that I can take that nice long seam. Now this pattern is easily adjustable. If you want to make this bigger, you could use 20 strips. If you wanted to make it smaller, you could use 4 strips. It really depends on you and how many you'd like to use. Now I'm going to be using my 1/4-inch foot so that it makes it easier, so I make sure that I get the correct seam allowance, and then I just began sewing. For this to work, you are going to want to make sure that you're doing a very nice and straight seam allowance and that it is exactly the same for all of the strips. You don't want to switch it up and have one be a 1/2 inch and then another be a 1/4 inch. You just want to keep it very simple, doing that 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way through. Now that I have all of my strips done, I'm going to open them up and we are going to start pairing them so that the 2 that we did, we're going to be matching those now together so that we would sew this up along that long edge, and then you would have 4 strips sewn together. So just repeating this, the exact same process that I did before, but now doing it for these pairs. Now as you can see, I am not pressing it yet. I'm going to wait to press it until I have all of these combined into one big fabric piece. But if you would like to go through and press it while you are sewing, so like do one of your pairs and then press it and then do it that way, you could definitely do that. This is just more, I wanted to get everything sewn up as my iron is in a different part of the house. So I found it easier to do it this way, where I just sewed up all the pairs and then I went and ironed it. But now that I have this complete for one pair, I'm going to now repeat the same process. And then what I will do, since as you can see that this is now 8 strips, for that other strip I am just going to match it up so that it's easier for me to just get all of this done, and then I only have one final seam left. So again, just taking that 1/4-inch seam allowance for this strip, being very careful that I make sure it ensures that 1/4-inch seam allowance and it is a straight line. So now I am moving on to my final seam for these strips, and I am just going to sew both of these together with right sides together. So as you can see, it is a really repetitive process to sew all these strips together, but it's very simple, just going along that straight long edge, sewing these with right sides together, and then I'm just going to take that final seam all the way across so that I can make sure that I can have this one continuous piece that has all the strips matched up. Now I'm just going to take that seam. So now I'm going to go ahead, press all of those seams open. Now this is a really important part, so I would definitely recommend you do not skip it, as when we open these seams, what we're doing is we're going to make it a lot easier for when we get the patchwork effect. So you want to make sure that all the seams are nice and open, they're laying flat, that your fabric is also laying flat, making sure there's no wrinkles so that when we start to cut our strips, so that we'll have those individual patchwork effect, it will be laying as it should and it'll make it much easier to cut out. So here is my long piece of all the strips combined. So now I'm just going to trim up the edges in case there are any, that are a little longer than the other, and remove that. And then I'm going to be cutting out a 2.5-inch wide strip again. So I repeated this process to clean up the edges on both sides just so I didn't have to worry about it. And then once that is done, you can then start the process of cutting out your new strips. So as you can see, we have these 10 pieces of fabric are now sewn together. So I'm going to lay my ruler out on my board, and I'm going to cut this so that is 2.5 inches wide. So as you can see here, it's 2.5 inches wide, and I'm going to cut it all the way up. And then I'm going to repeat this so I have 10 strips. So essentially we had those 10 strips of fabric. Well, now I'm going to have 10 more strips of fabric. And as you can see, I am alternating them so that I get this really fun patchwork effect. So this is what it looks like. So now we're going to follow the same process that we did before and sew up these pairs of strips so that we can have those little pieces all connected. So if everything worked out correctly, they should line up really easily. So the width should be the same, as well as the length of this fabric. So you just want to go through, make sure you're lining up where those seam allowances are so that you can hopefully get this really nice and clean patchwork look effect. And then you're just going to take a seam for each of those pairs that you did. Now this can take a little bit longer just if you really want to make sure that your fabric is matched up. As you can see that I did do a chain method effect where, I sewed one strip and then I backstitched and then I just added another strip on so that I could get as many of these done as possible. So here are my new strips. Now it is time to start matching these up again. So as you can see, it has a really nice and clean look. I absolutely loved how it was turning out. I also really like this fabric. It's very fall to me. So now what we're going to do is just match these up again. So with right sides together, that new pair of strips that we have, we are just sewing all of this up so that we can get that really nice and big patchwork effect, and very similar to the first step of this process. So while this quilt does go back and forth a lot, it has a really intricate look while being pretty simple overall to sew up. So now I'm just going to sew all of these very similar to before. I am just going to do this one so that it has those two pieces on it so I don't have to come back. And I'm just going to now take that straight seam all the way through. So now we are on to the last step, and that is matching up these two pieces of fabric that I have sewn so that we can have our quilt top complete. So very similar to before, just matching these with right sides together at those seam allowances to make sure that the points of the squares all match up. And then I'm just going to take that straight seam. Once this is done, I'm going to go ahead and then press all of this out. So very similar to how we talked about the first time, you could have been pressing this out at each individual step if you wanted to. This is why though it was so important to press everything out at the beginning. As we have so many little pieces of fabric connected now, you really want to make sure that they're all laying nice and flat and smooth. So everything's looking great. Now it's just time to press it out, make sure it's all nice and flat. I did use steam for this just because there are a lot of seams that this helps it to just really stay down and stay where it needs to be. So this is what my quilt top looks like. I think it looks so pretty and so intricate, especially with these two fabrics coming together. So now what it's time to do is really just put everything together so that it's binded, it has some batting in the middle, and then a back. For this, I did trim the edges up a little bit as there were just a few pieces that were a little longer than the others. And then what I'm going to do now is cut out the backing, which I am going to use the original fabric since I had a lot of that. And then I will cut out the exact same amount for the batting that will be going in the middle. Once I had all of this cut out, I just started to do some free motion quilting. I just left it a really fun kind of whimsical design, as I did use gold thread for this, and the gold thread really took a lot to get it to work right, but I love how it looked in the end. So this is what my quilt looks like. It looks very intricate. The gold really stands out, especially since there were little gold details in the patchwork itself. And now what it was time to do was just go around, clean all of this up, and then add the binding. I used a bias binding foot for this. I have a video up on it. I don't know if I'd recommend it. It was very difficult to use, especially when it got to the corners. The straight edges were fine, but the corners were a little more difficult. So once that was done, my quilt was now complete. I absolutely love how it turned out, especially with these colors. It looks very fall, but this would be very easy to do for any holiday, for any season, just in general. And I really love how it looks. It looks a lot more intricate and harder than it really was. So I hope you take the opportunity to make one of these for yourself. With that said, this is actually our last fall video of the year, and now it is time to get into full holiday spirit. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next. Thanks for watching.